Nobody is saying this out loud, but once you hear it, it's going to explain so many of the insane behaviors that we're witnessing. He's completely freaked out about dying, and that terror is running the show. So today, we're going to put that terror on the couch. Nobody is framing what we're about to discuss this way. Because when we think about the terror of leaving the earth, of leaving no trace, no legacy, it really matters to each and every one of us. However, we're going to look at one particular person today. We're going to look at the person who wants us to look at him all the time. So we all know who I'm talking about. And we all know that he has some very specific personality deficits. So what happens when someone with that kind of profile, and we'll get into that, collides with his own mortality, his own annihilation, with virtually no obstacles in his way? You're watching The World on the Couch, where we put the daily news cycle through a psychological lens, because that's the part the news almost always misses. I'm Dr. Marlene Ryle. I'm a psychologist and a psychiatric nurse practitioner with 30 years of experience in the field. What we're doing today is having a discussion, and it's not clinical diagnosis, but we are going to go through some of the research on terror management theory, because terror is on the couch. Before I begin, I am going to be referencing the last episode on disinhibition and the late night post. So if you haven't already watched this one, or you find yourself a little confused during this episode, I strongly encourage you to go back and watch that one. There's been a long-standing pattern around holidays. Now, this past week, we acknowledged the sacrifice of our military in the name of the United States, in the name of what our freedoms mean and the enduring legacy of what the United States represents. Not our leader. By 6 a.m., he was posting attack posts. And when you think about it, last Memorial Day, he was doing a similar thing. He posted that Democrats were scum. And then on Thanksgiving, Democrats were radical left lunatics. And on Christmas, he, instead of bringing everyone together, he talked about making Canada the 51st state and taking over the Panama Canal and Greenland. That's his attempt to bring things together, which is basically to conquer unwilling peoples. Now, when we watch his feed these days, we're seeing a pattern emerge of like two very opposing subjects. One is about building things, a ballroom, a bunker, an underground hospital, $100 billion for that, reflecting pool, wants to put himself on Mount Rushmore, wants to put his name on everything, on the money, on the national park passes. All he does is post about his building projects. That's one thing he posts about. And on the other hand, he's posting about destroying. He's posting AI war fantasies. He's posting the Iranian fleet relabeled. He is lasering warships. He's the head of the Space Command Center. He is annihilating anything that might compete with his legacy. And other than these few endorsement posts, because he's so afraid of having someone who actually may have stood up to him in a meager way still be in power, he posts endorsements. But this pattern is of binary build, destroy, is directly connected to his terror, the terror of his own demise. which now is more present to him than ever, given what we've been seeing about his health issues. They're pretty glaring. The field of psychology has been talking about legacy, our existential crisis, our fears of mortality since its inception. Freud talked about the death drive, Thanatos, alongside the drive towards life. And Otto Rank contended that our fear of death is the primary human motivation for all of our activities. Ernst Becker wrote a book called The Denial of Death in 1973, and in it, he postulated that civilization was really just an elaborate defense against mortality awareness. You know, we build things as human, we create things, we leave marks because we know we're not going to be here forever. And knowing that causes us all deep-seated anxiety. So along came Greenberg, Solomon, and Pyszczynski, and they kind of put together these insights of Freud and Rank and Becker, and they put it in a lab under experimental conditions, and they came up with terror management theory. So what they found was when the awareness of death was primed with what they call mortality salience induction, when your awareness of death is seeming to be more close to you than usual, humans invest more in what makes them matter. They invest in their beliefs, they invest in their legacy, their worldview, that they invest in the things that they feel are going to outlast them. Family, their children and their children's children. This is how humans generally manage the terror. Something larger, something shared, something enduring. 20 years ago, I wrote a dissertation about scuba divers. And I wanted to see the connection between sensation seeking, which is a personality trait, you know, the way people pursue novel experiences or risky experiences. And I utilized a scale written by Zuckerberg, who did a sensation seeking scale that has 4 subtypes. And I measured risk-taking behavior in diving scenarios where I had half of them write about contemplating their death, that induction, and half of them were writing about something neutral like TV. And this is a standard experimental induction. So of all the subtypes, and there are 4 subtypes of sensation seeking. There's novelty seeking, thrill seeking, experience seeking, and disinhibition, which we talked about in the last episode. So I walked in there, you know, you have a null hypothesis, you kind of have to say, well, there's going to be no effect at all. But, you know, my inkling was that the thrill seekers were probably going to be the riskiest, show the riskiest diving when they were induced with a mortality salience condition. But it wasn't those thrill seekers. It was actually the people who scored high on disinhibition. So it was kind of counterintuitive to me. But what was interesting about my findings is that mortality salience didn't create the risk-taking. It amplified the risk-taking that was already there in a specific subtype of sensation seekers. So in a short time, I just, threw out sensation seeking, terror management theory, mortality salience, and I'm going to add even more on top of this. But this is to be able to pull it all together, the disinhibition, the idea of terror management. But we cannot do that, especially if we're going to look at this specific individual, without talking about narcissism and malignant narcissism and how these two things converge. So, the stock photo we have of a narcissist is someone who's like self-centered, they lack empathy, they have transactional relationships, their first and final thought, when they get up in the morning is what about me? And their last thought before they go to sleep at night is what about me? Everything in their universe collapses back onto the self, and they can have fantasies of unlimited success and power and brilliance and a grandiosity that can border on delusional. They also envy others who might have a legacy that outstrips and outlasts their own. Sound like anyone we know? But when we look at malignant narcissism, that's a much more severe configuration. It is grandiose narcissism plus antisocial features plus a paranoid personality orientation plus aggression that is egocentric, that soothes the ego. So there are no social or relational breaks. Every perceived threat, even the smallest one from like a guy in Kentucky in one district, that's dangerous. So the response is aggressive, and that response feels to that person completely justified. So how do these things converge? Well, in 2025, there was a meta-analysis done about terror management theory and narcissistic personality disorders. And they found that the narcissists, when they experienced a reminder of death, their behavior was more powerful. Their response was much more powerful. And someone with both narcissistic profile and a disinhibition structure have to note that the reminders of death are going to strike them as more intense. And because we as humans tend to go towards the larger vessel, right? The larger, the family, religion, our belief system, we're able to assuage that anxiety. But for someone with such a severe narcissistic profile, there isn't any larger vessel to absorb that terror, because the vessel is the self. It only amplifies the need to keep the self going ad infinitum. And if you think about it, or if you look at it, half of the 2026 posts that he made used first-person pronouns. And sometimes he talks about himself in the third person, but he's increasingly using first-person pronouns, sometimes 12 or more times in a single post. So the self-referentiality is accelerating. It's exactly as the research would predict. He's having a bigger response to the continuous mortality salience inductions that he's been experiencing. And he is lashing out and posting about putting his image everywhere, his name on everything. He is so paranoid about being forgotten that he can barely tolerate it. So we see that this decline is feeding the terror. The terror is feeding the decline. It is just like a never-ending cycle. But it's not just operating on the narcissist. This is a tool that cult leaders have used for decades, centuries. How long have cult leaders been around? They share a profile. Usually cult leaders have a profile of malignant narcissism. And they use terror management theory deliberately. They point their followers, and he's done this, outward. It's LGBTQ, it's trans people, it's immigrants. And that helps them. And he positions himself as like, I'm the only one standing in the way. And he said that, I'm standing between you and them because they're coming after you. So they put all of their hopes and all of their beliefs of legacy, of continuing, into him. And another YouTuber, Lucas Bean, documented how this mechanism is working in this political moment and how it worked with Jim Jones. But now we're seeing that the tools of the cult leader are being turned on the cult leader himself. He is absolutely unable to escape the doom loop of his own perceived threat of annihilation. And destroying the other seems to be as important as building his own legacy. It's the scary part. Everything except the self must be annihilated. And his followers are watching this vulnerability and vulnerability crack, and they're seeing it crack in real time. These AI war fantasies are not political statements. They're more that primary process expression, that dreamlike, illogical expression of a self that cannot tolerate the existence of anything that isn't itself, and cannot stop the terror of his own erasure, even if he takes all of us with him. Time for the card. So the card I selected today to symbolize this terror, this moment that we're all, most of us unwillingly sucked into, is the Tower. Now this card is quite unique. It's from the Legacy of the Divine Tarot by Zero Marchetti. And as you can see, the Tower itself is sitting on these stilts. It's, sitting above everything else, the nature, the natural world, it's in the sky. And when most people see the Tower, they see like total destruction and catastrophe. And like I did in the last episode, lately I've been sort of going back to the reference texts. Usually I don't look at them at all. But this is one of my newer decks, so I wanted to have a look. And the description met this moment with stunning precision. So I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from what the handbook that came with this card said, that came with this deck said. The Tower is built of gold, symbolizing how materialistic and acquisitive our conscious minds are. The Tower seems secure, just as our thoughts and attitudes seem rock solid to us. But the Tower is built on very shaky assumptions, the result of years and years of calcification, which can only be penetrated by intense examination or by a flash of inspiration, a lightning flash of revelation in which the true nature of our thoughts, attitudes, and worldviews is seen for what it is, a poor construct of the mind based on faulty assumptions. What this card is about is the assumptions are breaking down and causing this whole tower to be at risk. And that is what we are experiencing, and what he is experiencing but doesn't know it. So I know this has been a bit of a heavy episode, but the realization that I made while I was prepping for it and thinking about it and going over the terror management theory research that I did for my dissertation and the precursors to it, the realization that he doesn't care whether we exist or not, whether anyone else exists or not, is terrifying in and of itself. And our public schema is inadequate. Our, saying he's erratic, unhinged, bizarre, it doesn't capture the reality and the danger of this moment that we are all in because of him. And there is a leader who is acutely aware of his own mortality as his health declines in every dimension: physical, mental, neurological. And when these external guardrails are absent, he is spinning out this narcissistic grandiosity, the disinhibited terror, these fantasies of annihilation and self-preservation running simultaneously, the pitch getting louder, more frequent. He doesn't care if we exist. And that puts us in an incredibly precarious position. It puts the entire world in an incredibly precarious position. I'm Dr. Marlene Ryle, and the couch is always open.